whatever. And so it's quite possible to have a lead with the right ends and the wrong pinouts, and it's good night Vienna for your telephony. And of course, to the average man or woman on the street, they don't recognise that. So having the right lead is absolutely essential, and that's actually the reason why Digium don't ship the lead in the box, because there's too many different variants. But we should all be conscious of making sure we find exactly the right one to hook up. Yes, and in the case of the UK, Steve's right, it's neg 50 or neg 48 volts. And for ringing, we use 75 volts at 75 hertz. Now, this brings me on to another thing. When you buy a Digium, in fact, let me just see. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll save that thought, because I'm coming on to Digium cards in a moment. So just a bit of basic telephony. We know that it's the local office supplying our telephone line and giving us the dial tone and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things we need to be a little bit mindful of is the scourge of all people dealing with analog telephony, and that is the nasty business of echo, isn't it? Because inside each phone there's a 2 to 4 wire converter. The 4 wires are the 2 for the microphone, 2 for the earpiece, and they have to magically get turned into, those 4 have to magically get turned into 2 to get onto a telephone line. Now what happens is when we present the telephone line to the telephone, unless those impedances are pretty close, we won't get maximum power transfer. And when we don't get maximum power transfer, it means the power runs into the telephone, cannot be transferred towards the telephone, has to run back. And in the case of telephony, that shows up as an echo on the line. And that's why it's always a good idea to get some echo cancellation into the system. Maybe on your Digium card, the hardware echo cancellation module, which comes these days in a very fetching purple kind of colour. Not actually unlike that colour. Look for that card, it's a beautiful thing. Okay, so there are a good range of Digium analog cards, all the way from cards that can be configured just to drive a single analog channel, all the way up to a card that can drive 24 analog channels. Now, a couple of things to note when we talk about analog cards. The first one is that if we're going to drive phones, we've got to give the power to the phones, haven't we? And in order to do that, you'll notice that these Digium cards have the beautiful Molex connector, like an old hard disk drive, a pre-SATA hard disk drive power connector, and there's some magical circuitry on the Digium card that turns that into the right voltage to drive your phone. But there's another thing we must deal with, and that is all of these cards are capable of driving both FXO and FXS. So FXO, O is for office, so it's the telephone line. FXS, S is for station, it's the telephone. And what tends to happen is, look, I'm not saying that everybody in the world of Asterisk is bereft of common sense. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. But what tends to happen is sometimes people throw these cards in. They do remember to plug the power connector in. They put the top on the box, and then they forget which of those ports were FXS and FXO. And there's quite a striking difference between the two, actually, because one of them will have power on, and one of them won't. So imagine the scenario. It's a windy night, okay? There's a little bit of thunder in the background. Rain is lashing against the window. And our Asterisk person has just put the card in, switched the system on, and in their hand they've got a lead coming from a telephone and a lead coming from the wall. And they've forgotten which is which. And they think, which one will I plug in first? Which one should they plug in first? The phone, exactly, shouldn't they? They should plug in the phone, and what they should do is have the phone off hook and listen to when they plug in for a little bit of power to hear a bit of side tone, or if they like little electrical clicks, they can be clicking on the hook switch, and if they hear they've got some power. If it's got an LCD display, it might light up as it goes in. And there's a very good reason for this, and it's of course because the FXS port on the Digium card is supplying power, and the line coming from the wall is also supplying power. Now in the factory where Digium create these cards, there's a special machine that injects just the right amount of magic smoke into each card. Okay? It sort of squeezes it in, and then it seals it. And if you accidentally put the powered line from the wall into the FXS port, you might get away with it. But if there was some ringing going on, you might not. At which point the magic smoke would be let out of the card. And once that kind of balance has been distorted, it's not going to work so well after that. In fact, it may not work at all. So we need to be very, very mindful of that fact. Okay, any questions on analog telephony here? Because we're about to cross the void into the world of digital telephony here. We can carry on? Okay, let's carry on. So we've also got digital telephony, and we've got a thing called the BRI, the Basic Rate Interface. Now, I'm not expecting a huge amount of recognition here because it's not a big standard here in the US. But over in Europe, I mean, if you go to Germany or the Netherlands, they love their BRI. Or they get very excited about it. They love it. And the BRI interface has two digital channels, both of which are at 64 kilobits per second. So we've got one voice channel there, the other there, and then we've got a 16K data channel, giving us a total bandwidth of 144 kilobits. And in the old days, think before DSL, we used to get very excited in Europe by aggregating those two channels and getting a whole 128K worth of connection to the internet. And then realizing that our telco was charging us twice for the privilege because we were occupied, and that was the disappointing part. But that's BRI, and Digium have a wonderful card called the B410P, which is a joy to use. Now, if you were trying to do BRI more than, I don't know, about 18 months ago, there used to be a bit of nastiness. You know, you might be familiar with MISDN and BRI stuff and all that kind of stuff. It was really, it's a bit like witchcraft, really, trying to get all that black magic, trying to get it all work. You had to stand on one leg and kind of pull a plug out and all that kind of stuff. However, now it's totally part of the DADI framework, and you can put your B410P card in just like any other Digium card, and it's going to work perfectly, very easily. Okay, and we've also, of course, got the PRI, the Primary Rate Interface. Now, in North America, just because you guys like to be different to virtually everywhere else in the world, we have the T1 connection based on a 1.544 megabit connection, which is kind of weird, isn't it? Have you ever asked yourself, have you ever sat there, you know, you're amongst friends, they're trying to get you to enjoy yourself and have a great time at the club that you're at, but you're thinking, why is a T1 1.544 megabits per second? You know, why is that? Because when I get my calculator out and divide it by 64 kilobits per second, which is the size of the individual bearers, I don't get a whole number. There's something wrong there. And of course, what it is somehow, and maybe cunningly, you might argue, if you're from North America, you use 1 bit for framing. Now in Europe, we use a whole time slot for framing. You guys use 1 bit. And over a number of frames, you build it up into a word. But that's why. If you divide 1.544 megabits by the 64 kilobits, you actually get 24 1/8. Because it is that 1 bit. There you go. Problem solved. You'll be in at lunch today telling everybody this, won't you? At length. Maybe using it as a mechanism to interest members of the opposite sex. Anyway, let's move on. So the E1 over in Europe, we've got 32 time slots, and we're proud of it, okay? They are numbered from 0 through to 31. 0 is out of our reach as far as Asterisk is concerned because it's there for timing and synchronization and nothing else. We can't use that. But we can use the following 31, labeled, interestingly, 1 to 31. That makes our lives easier, doesn't it? It makes them easy to count. We almost always use time slot 16 for data, okay? Now, you do occasionally hear people talk about an old-fashioned protocol called CAS. Now, when I say old-fashioned, it's actually still in popular use in large parts of South America and some other places. CAS stands for Channel Associated Signaling. Okay, so the signaling for that channel, the setup and tear down messages, actually happen inside the time slot. So if you could listen to one of those guys before the phone call, before it started, or before certainly your phone rang, you'd hear some stuff, some tones going on in there. Channel Associated Signaling. Actually, much more prevalent these days is ISDN, Integrated Systems Digital, Integrated Services Digital Network, something along those lines. And it's based on the Q931 protocol, and that's what's called a CCS service, a Common Channel Signaling, because all the signaling takes place in time slot 16. And that's extremely easy to set up. In fact, we have a bit of a breeze in Europe compared to some of you guys in North America. I have to fiddle around setting this stuff up. We just do a few settings and it works. We don't even have to ring the telco and get them to turn on the data channel or anything. It's just all there. It's very, very nice indeed. Now, there are lots of different protocols around the world. In fact, when Alistair was asking about different tones, this was what I was thinking about, because I used to work for a company where we used to deal with, globally, lots and lots of different protocols, and there's a large number of them out there. However, you do invariably find that the less well-known ones actually look quite like the known ones, 95% of the cases. But it's good to know your protocols, And, of course, the other thing is that not only do we need to support those individual protocols, but by the way, just while we're talking about protocols, if you're using ISDN, your Digium card is going to just work. If you're using QSIG, the intra-PBX version of ISDN, it's also based on Q931 protocol, but especially for two PBXs to talk to each other, again, your Digium card's going to work. If you're using R2CAS or MFC R2CAS signaling, then you're going to need some additional software. It's still going to work, but you're going to have to do a little bit more work to get that going. So there's a nice range of Digium cards that cover all of this, all the way through from a single PRI, which of course could be up to 30 phone calls, couldn't it? All the Digium cards actually do T1 or E1. So if it's working in America, it's going to be 23 or 24 phone calls, depending on whether you're using ISDN or the old CAS robbed bit protocol. Does anybody here know about the robbed bit protocol? Does anybody want to know about the robbed bit protocol? Do you know what? Just because I can, we're just going to take a very quick minute and go back in time and talk about bit robbing. Just very quickly. So just here, this is the robbed bit thing. In each of these time slots, there's actually 8 bits in each of those time slots. And those 8 bits represent a sample taken of an individual voice. Now, do you remember binary numbers from school or college? Like 110011, whatever. If you look at a binary number, it has a big end and a little end, doesn't it? It has the most significant bit and the least significant bit. Now, if you change the most significant bit, well, that's most significant, you know. But if you change the least significant bit, it has very little bearing on the value of the number. So what the crazy Americans did was they ran along here, stealing. Do you want me to do that again? Okay. They ran along here, stealing the least significant bit from every single one of those. And of course, it didn't change too much, the kind of voice sample, but it did allow them, over a number of frames, to build up a data word that would have been represented in time slot 24. And that's how they do it. That's bit robbing, US style. I know none of you wanted to know that, but I just wanted to do that, okay? So we'll move on from that. So, range of Digium cards is the story, and they're going to cover everything. Notice the beautiful purple modules there again for echo cancellation. Who said echo cancellation? You should get a sweet. Yeah, there you go. He's building up a collection there. You're going to be selling these in the lunch break, aren't you? Okay, now, of course, the other thing is connectorisation. Or because you've got a PRI, you'd think, because your Digium card ships with an RJ45 socket on it, you might think, I'll just look around the thing on the wall with the RJ45 socket and hook it up. Again, if you're in a certain place in South America where it's a CAS-based protocol, it's probably going to be BNCs, you know, the things that you push and twist on, coaxial connectors. So what you need is a thing called a balun. This is the deal here, and